Hey guys, welcome to another.
Come on, Dusty!
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of VTEC Academy. You're about to get schooled. Well guys, it's been a little while since we've done a tech inspection, so today I thought I'd start off with the K20. So I've got the assortment here. I've got a couple of Type Rs. This is JDM Integra, Honda Integra Type R. This is Civic Type R from the 06 up Civic. I have a, I forget what this is, EP3 motor. I have a base RSX motor, and I have an RSX Type S motor, and I have a 2006 Civic Si motor. So what we're going to do is we're going to review them all real quickly, kind of tell you what the differences are, and keep in mind that we're going to be doing this as it would go for doing engine swaps. So let's start off with the Type Rs, because Type R. So a lot of people talk about the K20A JDM motor, and when they talk about that, oftentimes people assume they mean Type R motors, and that's not strictly true. The K20A is just basically the 2-liter K-series engine that came in a lot of the cars in Japan. And there's even variations that are basically the same as our base RSX K20A3. So if somebody talks about a K20A, ask them what car was out of, because it could make quite a bit of difference. You're anywhere from 160 horsepower up to 221 horsepower. So first off, right here we have this K20A that comes out of the Honda Integra in Japan. They didn't have a model called the RSX, they called it the Integra. You can tell this particular one came out of the Integra because it has a power steering pump, and that's how they came. It also has this manifold that looks very similar to the one that comes on our Type S, but it actually has slightly larger runners, so it flows a little bit more air. Our Type S in the US had a little over 200 horsepower. This particular engine had 217 horsepower. There was another version that came in the EP3 over there, the Civic Type R, from 2002 through 2005, and that one had a little bit less horsepower. I believe it's about 212. Otherwise, they are very much the same. There was a third K20A that came with over 200 horsepower, and that came in the Accord Euro R. Now, the Accord Euro R is the only one I don't have here. That one looks very similar to this particular motor, the Type R motor that came in the 2006, because it has this different style intake manifold on it. Although, in my experience, the majority of the Accord Euro Rs came with the RBC manifold. I've also heard said that some of those motors came with the RRC manifold, which again, those manifolds are very similar. These just happen to have bigger runners. The other thing about that is it was a drive-by throttle cable, not drive-by wire. If you look at the US car that looks like the Accord Euro R, that would be the TSX. Those were all drive-by wire. In Japan, the drive-by cable Accord Euro R had a throttle body that was very similar to the one that comes on the DX Accord from 2003 to 2005. It's probably a little bit bigger bore, but it's almost identical in all other measurements. The other K20A that we have here is this one right here. It's from the 2006 Civic Type R. This one actually has 221 horsepower, so it has even more horsepower than the Integra Type R motor had. Now, some of the other differences are it's got a different block casting. This block casting on the later model version is identical to that of the Accord Euro R. Obviously made in a different manufacturing facility. If you look at the Integra Type R, the EP3, the RSX Type S, the CRV, they all had a similar style block casting. Now, if you go to the back side of the block, you'll see there are actually quite a few less bosses for mounting things. That's because the way the mounts worked on the Accord Euro R and the American Accords, there was this big bracket that mounted on the back of the block, and there's places to bolt that on there. But again, the EP3 and the Integra Type R did not have that. They were much more, they looked like the Type S block from the American car. Some of the other differences between these two engines, besides the horsepower, are This one had a idler pulley on it because it was electronic power steering. This one, of course, power steering pump. The idler pulley, by the way, is the same. If we took the one off an EP3 and put it on here, it would work absolutely the same as it did on the one that came with this engine. This particular one is drive-by-wire because it comes in the 06 Civic, which is drive-by-wire. And there is also down here, you can look at this manifold here for the radiator outlet, and you'll notice that it points up just like it does on the US Accord and US TSX. If you want to use that for a swap, you're going to want one that points down rather than up, because that works with most of the swap radiators that you find here in the US. You can, by the way, change out this whole piece right here for one off of a CR-V or an RSX or an EP3, or if you buy just the thermostat part right here, this piece that actually has a thermostat on it, if you get it from the first generation RDX, that one points down as well, and it'll bolt straight up to this. Some of the other differences are it has a chromoly flywheel. I'm not really sure what the weight is, but it's a little bit different. One thing I want to check here real quick is the key on the crank angle sensor. It is the same. It is the same as the RSX and the CR-V and the EP3. So a RSX harness would be compatible with this. You would just wind up having to make sure you had a drive-by throttle cable throttle body. Again, in the US, you can get that off of the 03 to 05 DX Accord. If you want something slightly larger, you're going to need to find a JDM Accord or R throttle body. So you can see the difference between these two headers, but basically the configuration is the same. It's 4 into 2 and then into 1. There's a slight difference in the way they're set up, most likely due to the placement of the rack. The rack is on the subframe on the 06 Civic Si, and it's on the firewall, but also very low on the Integra Type R. Now, if I recall correctly, remember seeing what they look like. On the shorter side, there was a piece of flex pipe, and on here there was the ball joint gasket that you see so often with the earlier model Hondas. So it's kind of interesting that they used a little bit of both on those to do it. One of the big problems with a lot of the aftermarket headers is there's no pivot up close here. So what winds up happening is it's all a one-piece long header, and if your rear mount isn't stiff enough, what winds up happening is the header moves significantly for every little bit of movement that the engine has. So Honda, of course, took care of that by putting flex joints as close to the head as possible, and specifically in between the brake, between the 4 and the 2 pipes. For those of you who are wondering about these two motors, this is actually a 0 miles crate motor from Japan, Civic Type R, and this I was loaned to me by the people over at JDM Hotline, which is a local company here in Phoenix that imports JDM engines. This one belongs to the general manager. He's putting it in his EK Civic, really nice looking car. And actually it might be an EG Civic. This is going in his car specifically. So, and this is kind of cool too. Couple things. I don't know if you guys have noticed, a lot of the engines that we get out of salvage yards, and they almost always come with a Fram oil filter on it. This particular one actually came with a Honda filter on it. This one has a Mugen filter on it. And interesting to go along with that, it also has some J's Racing silicone hoses on it, and it has a spoon transmission. I'm curious to see what's different about the spoon transmission, what they've done to it. I wonder if it's got a different style of LSD in it. This could very well have been an engine that was run at possibly one of the one make competitions that they have there in Japan, where they race all a single make car. Something else it has is this right here. This is J's Racing T-Rev Ace Alpha system. So what it looks like is something to help with lowering the pressure in the crankcase. It's connected up to the valve cover with a hose, and it looks like there's some valve work in here as well. So this would normally connect to the intake air tube, and use the velocity of the air coming in from the intake air tube to draw down pressure in the crankcases. And then when the throttle body is closed, it looks like it has another port here that might be connected straight to vacuum, so that when the throttle body is closed, vacuum from the intake manifold would then further lower pressure. Curious to see if it makes a lot of difference in horsepower. I know a lot of the big drag cars run as much vacuum as they can in the crankcase, and that keeps the pumping pressures down so that the engine's not moving so much air inside of the motor, pumping it back and forth, and that helps with horsepower. So kind of an interesting little device that's on this. Although the block bracket looks a little bit different with this kind of extended place back to the back of the block, they are actually the same. The location for where the studs are up on top are the same, although they're 14 millimeter instead of 12 millimeter on the newer engine. If you're doing a swap kit, most swap kits have mounts that will accept either one of the block brackets, and they are both located in the same location. One more word about this, the wiring harnesses. I did say you could use the RSX harness on this engine, but let's say, for instance, you weren't going to put this, you were just going to take this motor and you wanted to bolt it into your 06 Civic Si. This wiring harness will bolt straight into your 06 Civic Si. I mean, really, the only difference between this engine and the American engine as far as electronics go is this lacks the VTEC oil pressure, which, of course, you can disable on using a K-Pro or K-tuner. So that's pretty much the only difference between using this in an 06 Civic Si and using it and the stock engine. And the lengths are fine. On this Integra Type R, this is a little bit different. This is actually slightly shorter because it doesn't have to reach as far to get into the firewall. Remember, this is a right-hand drive car this comes on. Again, the big differences are, number one, there's no VTEC oil pressure sender on this, and again, you can disable that with a K-Pro, or if you're using K-tuner, you could also disable it. The other thing is it has one extra wire on the C101 plug. That's this plug right here, and that's just white wire with a blue stripe, and that's actually for your alternator light on your dash. So if you're swapping it into an older car, that is already there in the harness, unlike it is on the American harnesses. So that's handy to know as well. You don't have to look to try to hook up to it. It's right there in the C101 plug. Let's look at some other motors. Okay, so I have here the two most common engines that are probably going to be used in the US in engine swaps. This right here is the RSX Type S engine. This is probably the one that most people are looking to purchase when they're out buying an engine, and this is the 06 Civic Si, a slightly newer version of this motor, but for the most part very, very similar. This again is a K20 A2. It was a 200 horsepower motor, came in the RSX Type S, came in this car from 2002 to 2004. Okay, then in 2005 and 2006 there was a slightly different version of this motor. It was called the K20 Z3. Looked almost identical, electronically very, very similar. The big difference was that one, according to Wikipedia, had 210 horsepower, but for some reason, I seem to recall it having 206 horsepower. But the discrepancy may have to do with the way horsepower was measured. I think there was a change made in how it was measured around that same time. But basically, the Z1, which is the second version of this motor, had a few more horsepower than this particular one did. The Civic Si motor, by the way, all had identical compression, 11 to 1. The Civic Si motor, again, 11 to 1 compression ratio. This only had 197 horsepower, but this engine responds really well to tuning. You can get as much horsepower of this as you can out of these right here, and with the proper parts, I think this engine actually makes more horsepower. So let's talk a little bit about some of the differences in. First and foremost, we talked about the lower radiator hose outlet. They're missing on this particular one, but on the RSX Type S, it points downward. On this one right here, this one sticks up like it does on the TSX. First off, you want to change that lower radiator hose outlet. Again, you can use an RDX one on this particular thermostat housing. It'll bolt right on. and it points in the right direction, or you can change the entire thing from one out of a CRV or a RSX or EB3. Next, let's talk about the upper radiator hose. This one is actually on the face of the head, so it's on the front face of the head. It comes straight out off the end right here. It has an air assist valve that sits on the top of it, and that is a pollution control device. A lot of people take the air assist valve out, put in a little adapter, and they use a temperature sensor there to send information back to the instrument cluster in your swapped car to tell what the coolant temp is. If we look at this particular one over here, there is no upper radiator hose on the face. It's actually on the side of the engine over here, and it comes out at about a 45-degree angle. This manifold that this upper outlet is on actually also has the ports for the EGR. Now, EGR is not present on the 2-liter motor in the Civic Si. At least the EGR valve is not present, but all the porting's there. So you can actually, if you feel inside this back port right here, you can actually feel the opening for the hole for the EGR, and then it's blocked off with this block-off plate right here. But that requires a slightly different shaped hose over here because it's coming forward at probably about 30 degrees from straight off. Next, let's talk about the intake manifolds. The intake manifold on the 06 Civic Si extends out a little bit further. So let's say you're doing an engine swap into your CRX. This longer intake manifold generally causes a bit of a problem. The RSX one is a little more ideal, same as EP3 by the way. They call it a snail manifold because it kind of wraps around a little bit more, and it actually is slightly shorter, more compact, probably due to the fact that the nose on the EP3 was so short, and this is the same manifold that's used on the EP3. But it's shorter, fits better. It would work better if you're using this in an EK, let's say with EKK1 mounts where the engine sits farther forward, or it will work better in a CRX where the engine bay is so much shorter and you need that room between the core support and the engine. The throttle bodies are different. This one is drive by cable. This one over here is actually drive by wire, so it's actually controlled by the ECU. The bolt patterns are different, so you can't take this throttle body and bolt it on there. If you want a drive by cable throttle body for this, you're going to need, or you're going to want one from a 2003 to 2005 Accord DX. That one tends to work rather well. The other one is the one from the Accord Euro R. That one also works very well. Very, very similar, just slightly larger bore. Next, let's talk a little bit about the power steering pump and idler pulley. Now, you can take the RSX power steering pump and bolt on this. This normally doesn't come with a power steering pump. It comes with an idler pulley right here. And the idler pulley is the same one that comes on the EP3, the Civic Si. So it bolts right on the same hardware. All the alignments are correct. If we go over here, you can actually bolt this power steering pump straight on there if you are running power steering on, let's say, an EK or EG or DC2. Conversely, if you're not running power steering using the RSX engine, you can just bolt the EP3 idler pulley straight on there with no problems whatsoever. Next off are the block brackets. And the block brackets, for all intents and purposes, are the same as far as mounting goes. This surface right here is in the same relationship on both. This stud is slightly larger than the one that is on that comes on this vehicle. They both actually have 12-millimeter holes down there, but the stud itself is a little bit bigger. It's a 14-millimeter as opposed to a 12-millimeter on this one. So usually with a swap, you pull that out, and you just use bolts in there and get rid of the stud altogether. You'll notice this one's a little bit different. This one is short, triangular, pretty compact. This one has this bolt hole way back here in the back. I think that actually came about from car crashes. I think at one point Honda wanted to try to reduce the amount of damage to a car that was in a front-end collision. So they strengthened it by adding a fourth bolt onto there. On some of the later model K24Zs, they even have a fifth bolt that sits in here, like right in here, that I think is for the same purpose, just to kind of aid in survivability during a crash. Electronically, the injectors are the same. They're interchangeable. The coil packs are the same. They're interchangeable, and they're not necessarily a chain. There's a couple different manufacturers of coil packs depending on where the engine came from, but for all intents and purposes, you can swap them out with no problems whatsoever. Let's talk a little bit about swapping intake manifolds. Like I mentioned before, the intake manifolds are different, so let's get a couple of them and let me show you what the differences are. All right, so I have the manifolds you typically find on these cars. This is the RBC that comes on the RSX Type S. Remember, there's a Type R version of this too with slightly fatter runners. And this actually is the RRC, which is the Type R version of the RBC manifold, which comes on the 06 Civic Si. But just having them side by side here, you can now see the height difference between the two of them. So this is a longer manifold, more likely to interfere with the radiator and stuff. If I line up the top edges of them, you can see that this one is going to be taller in the engine base. So let's say you're swapping into a Honda CRX, which has a fairly low hood line. This is actually going to wind up hitting the hood, because not only does it stick out further, it also comes up a little bit higher. So you may wind up with a little bit of a clearance issue on your CRX because of that. Now, let's say, for instance, you have 06 Civic Si motor with this manifold. You want to put it in your CRX. Maybe you want to put this particular manifold on there. So there's a little bit of a problem there. If you look at the way they mount, you can see the bottom. This is quite a bit bigger, and all the stuff is missing on this one. Normally, there is this piece right here that has the hose that leads to the backside of the thermostat valve, so water circulates in the engine when before the thermostat opens up. It keeps the head cool, but that's how this normally works. So we need to have this on this. So we have a solution for that. Hasport makes this handy little adapter plate that you would use to sandwich in between your RBC manifold and the head of your 06 Civic Si. Now we have a place to mount the air assist valve. We have the recirculation hose for the head that comes off the bottom of the plate, and we can still have the nice compact intake manifold that has a lower profile so that we can get it on our CRX. So this would be the solution if you wanted to take this style manifold, put it on a Z3 engine, or even a TSX motor or an Accord motor, and you wanted to mount it in the CRX. So that comes in pretty handy. Then we have perhaps people wanting to go the other way. Let's say you've got an RSX Type S motor and you want to put this Type R intake manifold on to try to maximize things. Well, I'll show you what you do in case of that. This is a let's see here, an RBC. I keep calling this RBC and it's not. This is the PRB, sorry, PRB. Anyway, the RBC manifold normally has that piece that sticks out. If you notice, we've actually just cut it off. The way we did that was we took the PRC manifold gasket, put it on the bottom, kind of scribed a line, then I kind of rough cut it with a saw, and then came back with a flapper wheel and sander and just kind of smoothed it all out. With that done, we can mount our manifold on the engine, and there's plenty of room for this little side piece to mount on as well, so nothing's interrupted. It all works as it should. We did talk briefly about the bolt pattern. They are different. You're going to need to use a different throttle body. And if you're buying an oversized throttle body, you need to make sure you get one for the 06 Civic Si. I wonder if anybody makes that. You could get one for a Accord, a 2003 to 2005 Accord, an oversized throttle body for that, and that would go right on there. But you're going to need, but it has a slightly different bolt pattern. I know there's a bunch of companies that make adapter plates to go from one bolt pattern to the other. Certainly somebody makes a throttle body that's already has that newer bolt pattern. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed this episode of VTEC Academy. If you like what you see, please think about liking and subscribing. We're going to catch you later.